right, I'm Kevin McKenna, and I'm here with Aleksa Manila, who is a drug counselor by day and drag diva by night. Aleksa, why don't you start by telling me a bit about your upbringing and how that shaped the activism that you do here in
Sure.
Seattle?
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks for having me for this project. It really is an honor to be included, especially with my personal heroes like Marcia Botzer. But as far as my background, I'll probably start where I was born, which is in Manila, Philippines, hence my stage name, my drag persona, Aleksa Manila. I was born in the Philippines, in Manila, like I mentioned, and I was raised by a single mom who is a domestic abuse survivor and who also survived World War II during the Japanese occupation. I think a lot of my activism is really influenced by my mother. I was raised by a single parent. I did have siblings, but they were much older than me, so by the time I, was trying to make sense of the world, so to speak, it was just really me and her. But she taught me about independence. She taught me about resilience. She taught me to speak my mind in a compassionate way. I also grew up during the Marcos regime with former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, who ruled for 20 years during martial law. And I remembered standing in the kitchen, and my mom would tell me exactly what the presidency was doing at the time with the government. But she told me, look, this is what I'm telling you, this is what's really happening, but don't say this again in public. And as a little kid, I was like, what's that about? And of course now as an adult, having done my own readings and also just being exposed to that, to the regime, really it made sense soon after that, especially because it hit home. We had family friends that were being abducted and buried alive. So these stories are real. Just recently I was watching a documentary from the Philippines where they were asking millennials, Filipino millennials, about what they thought of Ferdinand Marcos, and a lot of folks mentioned the First Lady, the former First Lady, her collection of shoes, the glamour, the glitz of the government at that time, and nobody talked about the dictatorship. Nobody talked about the corruption. Nobody talked about the real poverty happening behind the palace. And then they interviewed folks that survived, and it was really an eye-opener to see how folks quickly forget about history. And so that really humbles me, and it reminds me that there's a lot of work to do. Aleksa Manila was really born out of the HIV prevention movement, not during the 80s per se, but more in the 2000s, the more recent decade. I was part of a 13-city HIV prevention program from CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It was through the University of California, San Francisco, the Center for AIDS Prevention Studies. And the study was called YAMS, the Young Asian Men Study, which was based in Seattle. And the mission was, or the purpose was, to target young Asian Pacific Islander gay and bisexual men, to talk about self-esteem, to talk about racial ethnicity, and to be proud of that, so that we could make healthier life choices, that we could make healthier, safer sex choices with our partners. And one of the things that we did was to create social events, make it fun, capture folks, and then once we have a captive audience, talk about positive messaging. And that's where Aleksa Manila came out. As with many LGBTQ communities, drag personalities tend to be the focal point of entertainment. Oh, look at that, there's a drag queen, let's go watch her, or him, or a drag king, and whatnot. And so that's where Aleksa came out. And since then, it's really sort of bolstered my passion for activism. I kind of call it dragtivism. I don't know if anybody else has coined that, but I think it's cool because it really has a unique platform, so to speak. And it really reminds me of other drag queens, other genderqueer, other trans activists like Marsha P. Johnson, from the Stonewall Riots era to now, Marcia Botzer, who hails from Seattle and has done remarkable international work and continues to fight and I sort of look up to them to, continue to inspire me to do the work that I do. I try to make my work fun. I try to make it, memorable, and I think that's been very successful. I think, and, obviously, activism can be very angry sometimes, but I prefer to make it, something more fun and more memorable.
Okay. So you moved to Seattle to work for the HIV prevention program. And when did you start performing as Aleksa Manila?
Oh, sure. Actually, I moved to Seattle because of family, not for work.
Okay.
Yeah. So my entire family was already in the United States and Canada, and so my mom petitioned me, so to speak. So I'm an immigrant. I moved here in 1995. As far as the coming out process, I came out twice. First as a gay man, mid or late 90s. At the time, I had a boyfriend, my first boyfriend, and my mom was visiting. And I said, "Hey, Mom, this is so-and-so. He's my roommate. He's my boyfriend. I'm gay." I said it so quickly. I was so scared. I was raised in a Roman Catholic household, and she's pretty Catholic, but she's also very liberal, very open-minded, and very loving. I remember her saying, "You'll always be my son. Nothing will ever change that. I love you for who you are." Many LGBT folks that I've met over time, often don't have, a loving coming out story. Oftentimes they speak of being kicked out, and so I consider myself very lucky to have a parent that's very loving and very open and very compassionate. And then I came out again in 2001. When I won my very first drag title, the Miss Gay Filipino title. And at the time she was overseas. She was back in the Philippines vacationing, and so I called her up and I said, "Hey, Mom, I won the Miss Gay Filipino pageant." And I remember her saying, "I'm very happy for you. I'm very happy that you're doing something that makes you happy." And although my mom is very open about it, my siblings aren't as open. My two older siblings, who are my brothers, they're not as open. The gay thing was okay, and I think that has a lot to do with sort of the cisgender piece of being gay. Not that being gay is always cisgender, but at the time I was. But then the dressing up followed, and I think in their sort of conservative Filipino machismo culture, it was difficult, much more challenging to accept. So unfortunately, I haven't spoken to them in over a decade now. But in the recent years, I'm at peace with that. I try to speak with them, but I'm at peace now. My hope is that they'll come around. So Aleksa Manila was born out of YAMS, the Young Asian Men Study. We did this this social event called Recess, and we did a Vogue, an Asian version of Vogue, Madonna's Vogue, where, if people remember, they did she did a French Vogue version of it on the MTV Awards night. And what we did was we did an Asian-inspired version of it. And we had lions, we had dragons, we had bamboos. We were dressed up in all sorts of Asian garb. And the dancers approached me and said, "Hey, we heard about the Miss Gay Filipino pageant happening. You should do it and join and we'll dance for you." And I was like, okay. This was my very first time. And it had only been a year, maybe, if less, of just running around in drag. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. Long story short, I won every category except for Miss Congeniality. I always say that because I think it's funny. But that was actually quite remarkable. Because that pageant was sponsored by the Filipino community of Seattle, an old conservative ethnic minority organization in Seattle, and they hosted a gay, queer, drag pageant, which I think is phenomenal. Now, when it first happened, I did notice, some of the audience members were laughing at the event, and I noticed that some of them, and it's just a perception, of course, but I did hear some of them say, or looked at it as, gay men parading in dresses. And so when I won that pageant, I made a point. I don't want them to laugh at me. I want them to laugh with me. And so during my year as Miss Gay Filipino, I made efforts to combine and remind folks about the diversity of our communities. You know, I hosted fundraising variety shows where it highlighted the wonderful talent of both the Filipino community and the gay community. You know, when I hosted these events, it was really a sort of a fabulous reminder that our communities can interact wonderfully and peacefully. And so I think, you know, that was really a wonderful time in my drag sort of life.
So how can you talk a little bit about some of the activism you've done through drag, or in your role as Miss Gay Filipino or Miss Gay Seattle?
I've always thought that drag is a platform. It's a visual platform. It's a visual voice. I often think that if you're going to look at me, I'm going to make you listen to me. Having had several titles, especially, you know, the Miss Gay Filipino title, the Miss Gay Seattle, and the Empress of Seattle titles, which is part of the international court system, founded by Jose Sarria, and a lot of the late Jose Sarria, and a lot of folks don't remember this, but she was actually the first openly gay man to ever run for public office in the history of the U.S. He actually predates Harvey Milk, and Jose Sarria actually ran for the same title that Harvey Milk won years later, City Supervisor of San Francisco, which I think is remarkable. She was a drag queen performer at the Black Cat Cafe in San Francisco, and she would sing live. That was her, you know, shtick, so to speak. And this was at a time when it was illegal to be gay. And so she would sing arias, and she would code the lyrics. And if the local police, and they would have folks telling them when the cops are out doing raids, so she would, you know, add lyrics to her song saying, you know, or singing along, you know, don't be so gay, you know, the cops are going to be here tonight, something like that. I'm sure it's not like that. But she did that. Anyway, folks said, you know, hey, so she ran for this city supervisor position. Unfortunately, she lost, but she did gain a lot of votes, thousands of votes, but still she lost. And so one of the local guilds, gay guilds in San Francisco said, hey, you know, we want to name you Queen of San Francisco. What do you think about that? And she said, I'm already a queen. I'd rather be Empress of San Francisco. And so she named herself, you know, Mama Jose, Empress One, the absolute Empress One of all of San Francisco, the widow Norton, the widow of this self-proclaimed Emperor of San Francisco, Joshua Norton. He lived in the 1800s, very extravagant lifestyle. He even made a coin of himself, and so did Mama Jose. But anyhow, so she then created this Imperial Court of Seattle, Imperial Court system, which was created in San Francisco and in other major cities on the West Coast followed. And now there are over 50 chapters between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. So basically, think of any major city in these countries, especially the U.S., that has a significant LGBT community. Most likely, there will be a court of that city. And so there's an emperor and empress, a Mr. and Ms. Gay Seattle, Gay City of whatever city that is. And it sort of honors the British monarchy, but also making fun of it at the same time. You know, I doubt any one of us is really wearing real jewels, but they're just all rhinestones. So that's where a lot of the inspiration for the activism comes from when I've done all these drag events. But over the years, you know, I've made myself active and visible. And so with my professional work, I started, I was in nursing school, and then I got into HIV research. I started working for public health, And then I landed myself at Seattle Counseling Service, which is an LGBT agency. When I was first starting doing drag and doing HIV work and work within the LGBT community, I had a very strict boundary. I didn't want folks to know that I was doing drag. But over time, people kind of noticed that there was an intersection. And so over time, I learned to allow it, to just allow it to intersect. And so I think it's really created a sort of an entertaining value to HIV work, to LGBT activism. It makes it more fun. And it goes back to, if you're going to look at me, I'm going to make you listen to me. I've done a lot of speaking engagements, especially around marriage equality, going up and down, downtown and Capitol Hill, and reminding folks back in the day, to vote for marriage equality, and how much more fun is that to do it in drag, talking about the bathroom bill, and many other things.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your HIV work?
Sure. Let's see. It started at YAMS, and then eventually I started working at Public Health. I was one of the disease intervention specialists, and so I really learned a lot about doing actual testing for HIV and other STDs, talking about counseling, and really talking to people one-on-one when they're most vulnerable. And that was really heart-wrenching. I remember there was one person, very young person, who ended up testing positive, and they also knew me, and I don't know how they knew it, but anyway, they did. They knew that I was also doing drag at the time. And then I think to break the ice, to sort of break this news to him, he started talking about drag. He then started talking about watching shows with me, and at the end of that, he asked for a hug. And generally, I have a very, strong boundary about, body contact. But this was a special moment. This person just wanted to, be reminded that they're not alone, And I go back to that memory because it's very humbling, especially for the queer community where we are disproportionately affected by HIV, at least in the U.S. And so doing drag makes it more digestible, I think. Again, more fun, and sometimes, for better or for worse, folks fun at the idea of, HIV work. But I think it really makes it more approachable. HIV is a complex conversation to have. And I think when you mix in drag, I think it makes it a lot more easier to talk about, to discuss, and create normativity of talking about safer sex, talking about HIV. And I think that's partly one of the reasons why I've been involved in a lot of HIV prevention, intervention, and education campaigns. My face has been on billboards, buses, websites, and whatnot. And I think it's a wonderful way to talk about HIV prevention work, issues that are very relevant, very complex within the queer community, not just in Seattle, but really out beyond.
And when did you start working at Seattle Counseling Service?
I started working at Seattle Counseling Service in 2003. I was involved at the time with Public Health, Seattle and King County, doing the preliminary HIV rapid test, the 20-minute test at the time. Now it's like a minute now, which was quite remarkable. And we were, our site was Seattle Counseling Service, and that's how I learned firsthand the history of Seattle Counseling Service. And then there was a place called Stonewall Recovery Services, which was an LGBTQ outpatient facility here in Seattle. And unfortunately, they folded at that time. And then Public Health approached Seattle Counseling Service to adopt the program. And so it did. And that's where I come in. I was one of the first staff members under the addiction services at Seattle Counseling Service. And that's how I started. I started doing data for the addiction program, and then I became health educator for Project Neon, which is a groundbreaking harm reduction program that targets gay, bi and trans men affected by crystal methamphetamine addiction, which was actually it was founded much earlier than that. It was founded in 1993, but Seattle Counseling Service took it on in 2003. And so the program is a model that's followed around the world because of its innovative programming. It employs outreach workers that are part of the target population, which is very difficult to replicate. But I think Project Neon has been very, very successful in its integration within the community, and has been very successful at promoting safer sex and safer use methods within the gay community.
Outside of your job here at Seattle Counseling Service, what kind of advocacy do you do for the intravenous drug using community, for the communities that are affected by the programs that you are taking on here?
Say that again.
What outside of this building here, what kind of advocacy do you do for the drug using community, for gay men who are disproportionately affected by HIV and AIDS?
I'll start with the internal first. So currently I'm the not in drag, of course. So when I'm not in drag, I'm the Project Neon program coordinator and the addiction services program supervisor when I'm not in drag. And so a lot of the work involves community education. So I go out into the community and talk about the program itself, but also about the agency at large. We do a lot of LGBT cultural competency training, which also highlights cultural humility at the same time. So that's part of the sort of the professional responsibilities that I have, in addition to doing counseling, addiction counseling, doing assessments, case management, group facilitation, and whatnot. But outside of this building, where sort of my drag comes in again, and again, because addiction is such a stigmatized phenomenon, not just in the mainstream community, but particularly within the gay community, there is so much shame, so much stigma with coming out. Gay men are disproportionately affected by depression comparatively to their heterosexual counterparts. Gay men and bi men are disproportionately affected by meth addiction or meth use. Women, lesbian women, bisexual women, disproportionately affected by alcoholism. And so I think when I've been able to use drag as a visual aid, it's been very successful at destigmatizing, sort of again looking at the fun aspect of another way of communicating. And I think drag has allowed me to do that. Drag has allowed me to talk with people who normally would be too scared to say, hey, can I talk to you? Can I talk to you about my addiction? Can I talk to you about my drinking? I think without the drag, people would just continue to be suppressed. Not to say that drag is the answer, not saying that, at all, but there's certainly been conversations that I've had where I don't believe they would have happened if they didn't know me in drag. I think the drag persona allows it to be approachable. And I've referred a lot of folks into valuable services, much needed services for individual folks that I believe otherwise would continue to be stigmatized and not get the help that they need. And so drag has definitely helped in that. It allows it to be more approachable.
Can you talk a bit about how you use drag for civil rights causes, like the bathroom bill, or any other causes that you've advocated for in the community?
Sure. I go back to the entertainment value of drag. I think when we speak about very relevant social issues, especially within the LGBTQ community, of course, these are serious topics. right? But where and when I've used drag for its entertainment value, it's been very successful. I can use humor, I can use, this as a distraction, and remind folks that it doesn't always have to be upsetting, that it doesn't always have to be something tragic, that we could turn this around and make it really work for us. And not to say that it hasn't been criticized. And it's really sad that sometimes the criticism comes from within the community. I think because drag isn't always seen as something that's very serious, that it's always something just funny. Sometimes people don't take me seriously, when they say, "Oh, why is a drag queen talking about the bathroom bill? Why is a drag queen talking about marriage equality? Why is a drag queen talking about drug addiction and recovery? What's that about?" But you know what? You questioned it. And for me, that's good enough. It's a good, starting point. It's a good icebreaker. I got you to notice and I got you to talk. And my hope is that the conversation will continue to happen, so that you continue to be enlightened, that you continue to be educated, that you continue to be informed. I think we can't always expect everyone to accept everything, but it's definitely a starting point. The most recent one, I talked about the bathroom bill at City Hall. I talked about, I poked fun at it. At the end of my talk, I sang live. I used John Lennon's Imagine song, and I kind of, took liberties with the lyrics, and I made it work, and specific to sort of the bathroom bill agenda at the time. I would poke fun at things, saying, about the bathroom issue, about the transgender use of toilets. There's only a couple of things that you need to know. Number one, and number two. And that's it, and of course I would get this laughter, reaction from it, but I got people to laugh, and my hope is that I got people to remember what's really vital information that they need to know, instead of being divisive, instead of criticizing each other. Why not be open-minded and have an open heart, about the critical things that we really need to address, around compassion and an acceptance. And I'm able to do that with drag because it's fun.
Can you talk a bit about specifically what you do for queer and trans people of color in the community, in the Filipino community, but also queer people of color more broadly?
That's such a complex question. The question of what I do for the queer people of color community or the trans Asian community. I hesitate saying that I'm doing something, I'm always reminded, and I remind myself constantly, that I'm just who I am, that I do something because it's good for my soul. And if I'm lucky, what I do for myself, if it influences another person, if it encourages another community to live better, to live happier, then it's good, But I really hesitate saying I do something because of a community, because I think every single one of us does something for the good. I think every single one of us does something great, for one another. I don't feel that I'm, the only one doing it. I think every one of us is responsible for that. All I can speak to, about it is just my own little way, my own little contribution to the larger community that I belong to, that I'm a part of. It's really, it's hard to answer that one. Sure, I started things, but I know that I'm not the only one that can do that, Sure, I founded an organization called Pride Asia. I founded that in 2012, but I know that I wasn't the only one. It's successful because of community, because of our chosen families, because of our families, because of our love for each other, our respect for each other. Pride Asia is successful not because of me, it's because of others. And so, when I'm asked, what I have done, it's I don't know, and it's not so much I'm embarrassed of it, but I'm careful that I don't want to sound like arrogant, because it really is the work of one is the work of all. Sorry, I'm not really answering that question.
That's okay. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work that Pride Asia does?
Sure. So Pride Asia was founded in 2012, and our mission is to celebrate, empower, and nurture the multicultural diversity of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning communities through the Asian Pacific American Islander lens. One of the critical programming that Pride Asia does is the Pride Asia event, which coincides with the mainstream gay pride celebrations in June. But what we do specifically is do the Queer Asian Pride celebration at Hing Park in Seattle's Chinatown and International District. We look at that as a celebratory reminder within our API community in the middle of Chinatown at Hing Park, and say, we're queer and we're here, and we are part of the Asian American community. And we also do events within, Capitol Hill, and of course other parts of Seattle, where there are other mainstream LGBTQ communities, and remind folks that there are queer APIs. We do other programming like Rice Ball. Rice Ball is our fundraising event where we highlight and focus on queer API talent. We have our dim sum dialogues. It's a play on words. But yes, we actually do try to always have food at our events. So dim sum dialogue is our educational arm. It's taken different formats. But as of late, we've worked closely with the Seattle Public Library, where we hold forums and discussions typically around documentaries that highlight the queer API story. We highlight queer API authors and literary and academic individuals to highlight and talk about specific queer API stories, things around intersectionalities of gender and orientation and race and ethnicity, things like that, so that we don't forget the diversity of our community. Often when we don't speak to the diversity of our community, then we just default, to the assumed identities. And typically these are the positions of power and privilege, the straight, white, cisgender male of affluent economic status, of higher education status. And that's typically where it defaults. And so the purpose of Pride Asia is to remind our brothers and sisters, about the diversity of the community, and not to ignore it, not to be blind to it, but to accept it and make room and space and create safe space for all of us,
Could you talk a little bit about the fundraisers you've done for Seattle Counseling Service?
Oh my gosh. So the way that all started, so I started working here in 2003, and then in 2004 I was crowned Miss Gay Seattle. And part of my responsibility as Miss Gay Seattle was to hold fundraisers for to hold charities for nonprofit organizations. And no surprise, I obviously picked Seattle Counseling Service because that's where I work. Plus, it's an LGBT organization. So I held this variety show, and I called it Icon, a celebration of art, drag, and life. And it was held at the old Timberline, which is now Youth Care, at the bottom of the Denny. And it was very successful. It was really fun, and I remembered people talking about and comparing it to the old drag shows, at the Mocambo, the Pinocchios in San Francisco, which was really, really humbling to hear that people compared it to that. So long story short, it was successful. We raised a few $1,000s at the time, but this was like 10 years ago now. And anyway, shortly after that event, our executive director, Ann McGettigan, was asking me what I intended to do with the fundraiser, and I remember saying, I was going to do it maybe every year and then pick a different organization maybe. And she had asked me if I wouldn't mind choosing Seattle Counseling Service again. And of course I said, of course, without question. 10 plus years later, we're still doing it. It's really grown. It's become one of the sought after queer event in the Seattle area, and I hope beyond. And it really highlights the wonderful and amazing talent, queer and ally talent here in the Northwest. And year after year, I ask friends in the entertainment industry to volunteer their time. And of course, their talent is so valuable; it's priceless. But it's just so heartwarming that they would, contribute their talent and time for an amazing organization such as Seattle Counseling Service. And again, using drag as an outlet, as a platform to talk about very serious, work that Seattle Counseling Service does. Mental health therapy, addiction counseling, case management, HIV work. These are serious topics, but we're able to, talk about these things in a fun way, in an entertaining way, but still in a very compassionate, empathic way. And again, it's an outlet of sort of my drag persona that goes into this stage production, and we're able to talk about very serious things in a fun way, in a fabulous way.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Seattle Counseling Service as an organization?
Sure. As an out genderqueer person living in Seattle, I couldn't be more proud and definitely consider myself very, very lucky to be at a workplace where I can be who I am. Seattle Counseling Service was founded in 1969 at a time where it was illegal to be gay, when it was illegal to be able to hold the person that you love who happens to be of the same gender and sexuality. And Seattle Counseling Service was there. Behind me are actually our history boards. There's a picture of the house where we first started. We were founded by Dr. Robert Deischer, who was a pediatrician, a doctor at Seattle Children's Hospital. And, it's been amazing. A group of folks felt that there was a need for safe space to convene, and so they bought this house at the top of Capitol Hill by now Group Health Hospital, and they found a space to convene and find safe space to take care of each other. Folks to this day who lived through that era would talk about how scared they were that they had to create, sort of red flags and symbols to create safe space. In front of the house where there was the mailbox, if the red flag was up on that mailbox, it meant don't go in, the cops are around, they're raiding places, so don't go in, go somewhere else. At a period where we started collecting charts, for the folks that we were seeing for counseling, they had a file cabinet, and right next to it was a tank of gas, so that if we were raided, they could just light it on fire, and the identities of the folks that were being seen, could be protected. At a time when they started archiving, the charts and the documents, because this was a house, there was a kitchen, and they had secret panels in the kitchen cupboards where they hid these charts. And we've certainly come a long way. Now we are inside a 3-story building where we occupy 2/3 of the building, and we're outgrowing it. We're growing so much. And it's really fascinating to be able to work at a place where I can be proud of my orientation, of my expression, of my sexuality. Our executive director, Anne McGettigan, has been quoted as saying, "We are who we serve." And that's certainly very true. We are primarily an LGBTQ organization. Of course, we are open to all. Often people say, oh, what about non-LGBTQ people? What about heterosexual people? As long as you have a compelling reason to be here, please come to this place. This is a safe place, And we say that because right now we are really the only LGBTQ counseling service in the area. Everywhere else is available. And so we want to make sure that we have safe space for LGBTQ folks. But also we don't want to discriminate because there are non-LGBTQ people who may not be out yet. They may not say that they are LGBTQ. So we have an opportunity to make sure that we provide them the much needed service that they need, whether that means mental health therapy or addiction counseling. We are that place. We are that safe space to be. And we're still around, back at a time where we were hiding ourselves. Now we've got this giant rainbow neon sign that says SES on top of the building. It's just like this gay beacon, that sits on Capitol Hill, and you can see it from downtown Seattle. You can see it from the freeway. We've really come a long way, and it's fascinating to be part of that history. I've been here 13 years, and I've certainly grown up here. I have grown professionally. I have grown personally. I have discovered myself, and this is me talking as a staff member, and I can only imagine the folks that we actually provide services to. I can only imagine, how they've turned their lives around. And actually, I have witnessed those stories, and it's remarkable to bear witness, to their stories, and to feel lucky, to be an audience for these folks, and to share their stories that are, stories of coming out, stories of resilience, stories of survival, stories of amazing lives.
Could you talk a bit about the various services that SES currently provides?
Sure. Primarily, Seattle Counseling Service provides mental health therapy and addiction counseling or recovery, but also we do case management. We support folks in finding housing, finding employment, seeking health care, pretty much anything under the sun. We're a social service agency, and we particularly, address LGBTQ specific services like HIV intervention, HIV prevention and education, and specific things that disproportionately affect the LGBT community, whether that means depression, coming out issues, especially like late coming out, disproportionate, health disparities around addiction, like, with meth and gay men, bi men, things like that.
I can't think of any more questions. Is there anything you haven't had a chance to talk about that you want to share?
I often speak to diversity and just reminding folks that it's okay to be different, whether that means it's about gender expression. Just because I'm not a cisgender male or that I'm not a cisgender gay male doesn't mean that I'm not part of the larger LGBTQ community. I think often we experience horizontal hostility, so I remind folks that it's okay to be different, It's okay to have a different skin tone, that at the end of the day, when we take off all of our clothes, when we just bear witness to our humanity, we're all the same. you know, that it's not so much about equality, more that it's also about, you know, equity, you know, that it's about being able to sit at the table and sitting down, not standing and reaching for food, but being able to provide a seat for everyone at the table. That it's about, you know, having different voices, and that each voice is vital, you know, for our survival, you know, and really just encouraging people to be who they are. I started my, you know, true to drag queen history. I also have my drag house, the House of Manila, or Casa de Manila. I have over 40 children. Not all of them do drag, but it really is rooted in the history of, you know, the drag houses. And I invite people to watch, you know, the documentary Paris is Burning. It really speaks to that, where many of my drag children who at their teenage years, when they did come out to their families, they were kicked out. And so, you know, I talked with them and reminded them that, you know, life is still good. You make it the way you want to make it. And providing safe space for folks to be who they are and to be themselves and to keep dreaming whoever they want to be, and that it's okay to be different. And just, you know, just keep reaching for the stars and reach for the moon as well.
Do you think of anything else?
Anything specific to your project? What questions did you already ask of previous interviewees? Maybe a compare and contrast. Any generic questions that you've asked of them that you can ask me too?
That's a good question.
Oh, were they all specific to the subject?
What, I guess something that would be a common question is what really drives you to do what you do? And I think you touched on that a bit, but maybe if you could end with a well-formulated response to that question.
What motivates me to do what I do? I believe it's the personal pursuit for happiness. But recognizing that personal happiness is shared, that personal happiness is with community. And that also means finding love and happiness wherever you are. So it doesn't mean that you have to seek it out. It starts from within. And when you find that, it illuminates, and then you begin to share that with other people, and that creates community. I also feel that what drives me is the drive to align everything in your personal life, whether that means home life, family life, your job, your career, your peers, your group, your community. If everything is aligned, then it's a smooth journey through life. But it's okay if you get sidetracked. Just go back on track and just keep moving forward. And it's okay to step out of the bubble. I think I've talked about this a little bit, where I've mentioned to folks when I do public speaking engagements, where I wake up gay, I go to bed gay, I live gay, I work gay, I party gay. But that's because I live in a bubble. And that bubble, no matter, even though it's a safe space where I feel that I can be who I am, that's not the case for everyone else. And so when I like to step out of that bubble every now and then to ground me and to continue to humble me, so that it will continue to inspire me and motivate me to keep doing the work that I do, which really starts from within, from self, and hopefully inspire other people so that they can do the same work, within themselves, and then, replicate that and inspire other people. It only takes that one spark to create fire, to ignite it. And so I think that's what motivates me. It's an internal, spark that I like to share with other people. And just, I thrive on watching people succeed, and I think that's why I love my drag children. I enjoy watching them. It really brings joy in my heart to watch people succeed. And I think it's also true in my professional work. I love and I enjoy seeing people succeed in their lives, whatever shape and form that may take. And it brings joy, and I think that comes from being inspired by my mother, who is very selfless. She took aside her, personal sort of joys to make sure that her children were successful. But having said that, I think the personal joy came from making sure that her children were successful and loved. And so I think that's what really inspires me to do the work that I do. It comes from within. It comes from my own, personal biological family with my mother, and watching people do the same thing for others.
Okay. I think that's all I have.
Thank you.